Om Shuklam Baradaram Vishnum Shashivarnam Chaturbhujam Prasannavadanam Dhyayet Sarva Vignopashantaye Ishvaro Gururatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha. Okay. So here are some more questions. This is one question. I'm going to just read it out, which is a very, very common question talked about, discussed, and I think it's important to look at it in its proper context. So very relevant and very, lot of people have this. So this is how the question goes. Why are women in our tradition not allowed to perform prayers, religious rites when they are menstruating? Are they allowed to chant prayers, Vedic chanting, or cook during this time? In ancient times, this practice may have been acceptable due to poor sanitation conditions and poor hygiene, but in modern times, this is no longer an issue, especially performing prayers. How do we how do we help the younger generation understand these age-old practices from Vedic times? Okay. So of course, there are some questions. It's pretty comprehensive. There are some questions, and then of course there are some comments also. Some editorial. So I'm going to address a few different points here. These are all relevant. So one thing which is not uncommon to find, when it comes to religious practices, is that when we don't understand why something is being done or some particular practice is followed, then, we try to explain it. And we try to explain it in ways that suits our understanding. So what happens is that's really, instead of trying to find out the thinking or the understanding behind the practice, it's different. The starting point is different. So obviously in one, I already have figured some things out. I have a certain level of understanding, certain type of understanding, certain kind of thinking that appeals to me. And so I try to explain things along those lines, irrespective of what goes on. And we can mute that, that one of the things. Yeah. The proper thing to do is really inquire into what the reasoning is behind a practice. But in any case, so that is one thing. It ends up in some kind of logical fallacies, in thinking. So, for example, there's one thing they talk about. It's like I take a possibility and present it as a probability. I take a probability and present it as a certainty. And this is all we do very commonly. So what is anything under the general rule? Anything is possible. So when you think like that anything is possible, that means anything is certain, because I've already upgraded the whole thinking, into my way of thinking. This all ends up in wrong ideas, and conclusions. So anyway, so there are various points that are there, which I would like to touch upon before really explaining what is behind this. So one is this comment that, women are not allowed to do certain things and allowed to do things, or men for that matter, really. So in our traditions, we don't have anybody, we don't have a police, a religious police or a moral police or enforcers who come and sit down and tell you what you're doing, what you're not doing, and then you know uh, punish you for it. We don't have that kind of a concept. That is one thing to keep in mind. The other thing also to understand is, so this particular practice, okay, this religious, I'll call it religious practice, okay, because then this is another problem. Sometimes we use the word cultural, we use the term religious, we use the term traditional, these kinds of terms are used. Sometimes we just use them arbitrarily. Sometimes they are used with a certain negative purpose also. So if I want to de religion, de-religion, I don't know what the word is, but if I want to make it sound not religious, then I call it cultural. you know Also, the best way to destroy a religion is to not call it a religion, okay, which is not an uncommon thing which you find. So once you don't call it religion, then is there something you're doing, you know, and then what you're doing, especially it is old. So this what you are doing is an old practice, and then we have this other concept of anything that is old is primitive, and anything that is primitive is born of ignorance, and then we are the only wise people. It's interesting. So this has no connection with hygiene and with sanitation and all that. That's not the point here. Incidentally, if you look at the Indus Valley civilization, so they had in their urban areas, they had a highly developed system of sanitation, really, of sewage disposals. They had canals lined with bricks, and separate sewage water was separate than wastewater. All these things were going on thousands of years ago. This is not something new. So bathrooms were separate from the toilet rooms. They were separate rooms. You see that still in some parts of the country. In other parts here, in the most modern societies, you don't see that. Both are in the same room, you know. So which is more sanitary? Which is more advanced? So these kinds of thinking really are not, first of all, they're not even relevant here. So this is not a sociological issue. This is not a hygiene issue. It's not a sanitation issue. It has nothing to do with gender bias. you know there are certain similar rules are there for men also, I'm telling you. And you will see this. So I mean, women, because it is something to do with some religious ideas, or concepts. So all these are not so in every religious tradition, really, you find this. So in religion, to get to the question specifically, there is a concept of purity, religious purity and impurity, okay, which is different from physical purity and impurity. So physically, so there is, it has to do with clean, what is clean, what is unclean, right, on a physical standpoint. And then there is a religious concept where it has to do with, the religious purity has to do more with the mind and with the thinking. Because in religious practices, it's not just about doing things, it's also about attitudes and certain values and so on. Okay. So what happens is that we have this concept of shuddhi and ashuddhi. you know Shuddhi means what is clean and what is unclean, not just from a physical standpoint. That's why we have thinking. In our thinking, we have, so they say, your pure mind. What's a pure mind? What is a pure mind and an impure mind? A mind is a mind, a thought is a thought. Every thought, every mind has a thought, similar thoughts, in fact. So, in this now, how do I categorize which thought is pure and which thought is impure? You know, okay, it's not that simple. Physically, what is pure and what is impure? How do I define that? You know, if I'm buying pure gold, then little bit of copper in it is impurity. When I'm buying pure copper, a little bit of gold in it is impurity. So what is pure and what is impure? Okay. So these are all, there are certain ideas behind each concept. So whether it comes to physical, then there is a on a mental level also. So they have, because religion involves spiritual practices that affect our mind and that are addressed to our mind also. So thus, they have this concept of purity and impurity in every major religion. Keep that in mind. Okay. You see it more practice among people who are orthodox or follow it more seriously. And then in the every religion, even those that are not as orthodox, and then they will follow, they will compromise, and they don't follow it as strictly or as rigidly. So I won't get into other religions, but they are there in all traditions. So thus we have this concept. So there is Shuddhi and Ashuddhi. Now, when I'm doing prayers, for example, so before offering, prayer is a special activity. Okay, naturally. So this is something between me and the Bhagavan, me and the Lord. Okay. It's not like any usual activity. So in usual activity also, there are some people who physically, on a physical level, you take a bath every day. Some people take a bath occasionally. Some people take a bath twice a day. Okay. Some people take a bath, they shower and everything before they have breakfast. Some people do it after the meal. Some people don't do it all day, on a weekend. So it's all kinds of things people do. So it's all different levels of cleanliness, really speaking, if you think about it. Okay. So each one has their own practice and their own way of doing it. And of course, there are some conventions, conventionally, a lot depends on the climate and all kinds of things. So here also, now there is a special activity which is in religion, which is prayer. When I'm doing prayer, in prayer also, so in our tradition, we have three forms of prayer. There is Kaikam, Vachikam, Manasam. You know, I do prayers physically, like puja, when you do puja, you know, in front of an altar, doing things. And then I do prayer verbally, and I do prayer mentally. Okay. These are the three different forms of communion or communicating with Bhagavan, with the Lord. So in this also, before I engage in an activity, in a prayerful activity, what do I do? So one of the things I do is I want a clean environment. Okay. A clean environment. You clean up before somebody comes home. So Bhagavan also is going to be invoked, and then prayers, etc., are being offered. So obviously the whole thing has to be a clean process. You can't do it in a mess. So there is physical cleanliness is there. So people do that. The area, altar, etc., everything you clean. And not only that, external, then clean all the things that you need to do the prayer, to do the puja, called samagris, all the implements. All the implements are purified and are clean. You clean the pots and the spoons and all kinds of stuff. That is all on a physical level. What about myself? So should I be clean or should I be somebody who hasn't taken a bath for a week? No, I also be clean. Okay. So I cleanse myself physically. Okay. So that is on a physical level. I go take a shower. And then especially if I now this is on a simple level. Then there is also cleansing on the mental level. How do you do that? How do you do that? It's not by taking a shower. Mentally, we cleanse our mind, our thinking in terms of attitudes. That is by prayer. Okay. So there are certain what we call as purificatory prayers. That prayers by which I purify myself. Okay. Mentally. Okay. By invoking certain attitudes and things like that. So involves physical cleansing and mental cleansing by prayers. Even when we take a shower, really speaking, traditionally people will do that. So you take sips of water, chant certain prayers, and symbolically you cleanse yourself, even in terms of the mind. And then you come and do the puja. So that is called as, so shuddhi, cleansing on a mental level. Okay, this is not physical. So thus you have this concept of purity and impurity, that is physical, related to dirt, and then there is mental, related to our own thinking, shuddhi. So these both are important because we have that particular, that's the way we do worship. So here what happens now? So I regard certain things, what I regard as physically unclean, so I take care of that in one way. But that also creates a certain kinds of, on a religious level, that is what is called as religious purity and religious impurity. So certain things are considered impure, certain things are considered pure. Okay. It has nothing to do with natural or unnatural. Okay. Everything is natural. Everything is natural. So even from that standpoint, you say the body produces certain secretions. Okay. Okay. There are all there, everything is natural. So there is in physiology, there are two types of products in the body. There's secretions and there are excretions, right? We all know that. Saliva is a secretion. So, but whereas urine is a excretion. Carbon dioxide is an excretion because it is thrown. Excretion is some product which the body rejects. It throws out. It doesn't use. It has no use for. Okay. So that's called an excretory product. It's considered impure. Okay, even in physiology, you consider that impure because your own body rejects it. Okay. So that is one thing. Saliva you produce, that's also natural. So natural thing, nothing wrong in it. You swallow it. Okay, I produce urine too, but then it's not the same thing. That's an excretion. And you don't swallow that, even though it is sterile. Saliva has 100 million bacteria. Urine is 100% pure in bacterial content. There is zero bacteria. Yeah, in urine. But so what? No, one is an excretion. Okay, correct. So now, so it's in simple. The body produces certain excretory products. So those are considered impure. And so what happens is that period for women, this is a spiritual practice now. Okay. This is a form of spiritual discipline that they follow. So the women follow this, okay, as a part of their spiritual discipline. So when it comes to prayers and so on, men also have certain disciplines that they follow, which are similar, which are not unsimilar, that have to do with religious purity and religious impurity. So as a man, suppose I have to perform uh, a prayer, then just before prayer, this is what they'll do, especially when it comes to temples. Temple worship, they are much more conscious and much more orthodox and rigid. Why? Because you're praying for a lot of people. Okay. You're praying for a lot of people. If I pray for myself alone, okay, I make some mistakes, I make some errors. It's all on me. Okay. I ask for pardon and okay, I do what I do. But when I am a proxy praying on behalf of a lot of people, society, the world, then it's a serious thing. I take it. It's much more responsible. So it's much more intense when it comes to those kinds of worship. But you know what the priests do? So before they go and offer a prayer in the temple, they will take a shower. Okay. Along with physical cleanliness, with prayers and all, they will take a shower. Then they go to offer the prayer. Clean. Now, what happens on the way? It's very crowded. Somebody touches you. Somebody touches you. So at that point, you're clean, physically clean and shuddhi. You're also religiously clean to perform the prayer. Now somebody touched me. If somebody touched me, now either they also, if they have showered, it's fine. Okay, they just showered and came. But suppose they haven't. Okay. It's like touching something unclean. Suppose you are doing something, you are cooking, and then your hand touches something which is garbage. Then what do before going? You wash your hands. Then you go back and cook what you're going to cook or do whatever you're doing. So here somebody touched me, but they did not cleanse themselves, both from a physical or religious standpoint. So now what do? Now I have again become unclean. So I have to again go take another shower and come back. Okay. This is what they will do. Okay. This is what they will do when it comes to temple worship. Men also have to follow this. This has nothing to do with who the person is. Even women and men both follow this practice. Those who are orthodox. Okay. Irrespective, could be your own mother who touched you, but she didn't happen to take a shower. You showered going on your way to the puja room, and so your parent comes and hugs you. They have not showered. What do? Well, you will again go back and shower and come back. Okay. This is how orthodox people follow. But anyway, that is just to understand the concept behind it. So here also, in case of women, obviously this applies only to women, and it only applies during the years when they have this, during the menstrual cycle years. And so that period is considered, because it is a discharge and excretory product, which is constant. So that whole period, they consider themselves as religiously impure, and others also. Not that you cannot touch them. You touch them, then you have to take a shower and go do your prayer. Or if they happen to touch you. So these are the concepts. In all religions, it's like that. They want, most of the big religions, depending on how strictly they follow their own practices, they cannot go to the temples. They will not go to the house of worship. They will not take prasadams in some communions. Those kinds of things are there in all traditions. Okay. So here also they have that. So we follow that practice called as shuddhi. Shuddhi. So there is external shuddhi physically. Then there is in terms of prayers, purificatory prayers. That's why when you do pujas, there are a lot of purificatory prayers, and you do prokshanam. What they call the water, sprinkling of the water symbolically. You purify. You just washed all the utensils for doing puja. Then what's the point of again sprinkling water on it? That is symbolic. So because that is done along with certain prayers. And so which symbolically you do a religious cleansing. So there is this very significant concept of religious purity and impurity. And then people follow that. So men, they follow it in different ways, obviously, depending on who they are. And it is something that people choose to do, really speaking. What about cooking? What has this to do with cooking? Well, it has a lot to do with cooking, because in our tradition, all food, that is cooked is an offering, is offered. So in a lot of place, in some traditions, or in many traditions, so before you eat, you thank, they thank God. Yeah. Thank God for the food that you get. It shows a certain sensitivity and appreciation of divinity, in our life. So we also have, but because a lot of our prayers are also physical, so we offer naivedyam. So naivedyam is what we offer to the Lord. It's called naivedyam. And then afterwards you eat it. After the offering, you eat it. That's called prasadam. So we always eat prasadam. Food for us is prasadam. And what's the difference between the two? Something which after it has been offered, then I partake of it. That means it has come back to me. God has given it back. And so now it takes on a different meaning, in one's own mind. It is connected to the attitude of gratitude, and acceptance, glad acceptance. That is what is prasadam, you know. So every time we eat food that is cooked, a meal, it is offered. That's why almost every Hindu home, you will see a small little altar in the kitchen, kitchen. So now, since all cooking, really speaking, is offered to the Lord, and during that period, during those the menstrual period of those 2 3 days, 3 days, what happens? So they, because I consider myself to be religiously impure, not physically impure, okay, religiously impure. So I don't do pujas. They don't do pujas. They don't do prayers. So physically, you go to the puja room or you go to a temple, they'll avoid doing that. Does it mean that you don't pray? You're not supposed? No, that's not true. Mentally, you can pray. People can pray mentally because you cannot curb your mind. Suppose your mind is thinks of a prayer. What are you going to do? So there is no restriction to mental worship or mental prayers. But here it is more in terms of the physical aspect of it, and also verbal chanting and all they won't do, but mentally they can say prayers. So cooking also is part of a prayer because offerings, all food is offered. So therefore they avoid cooking. They will not cook. Somebody else will do the cooking. So that's the idea behind this. Should understand it as a religious discipline that people choose. And you all know, everybody knows that not every single person does this. They will do it to different degrees. Generally, when it comes to temple going, so those who understand this practice, those who follow it, so that they restrict themselves too. So to different degrees now, you have different degrees of orthodoxy that people follow depending on their their mind, depending on how serious they are, depending on their pursuit. We don't judge individuals. Each one has a relationship with God, and they do things which they value. The important thing is to understand why we do things, not come up with certain ideas and then start activism. People then start an activism movement. Oh, women are not allowed to do this, women are not allowed to do this. Make it a gender issue. So make it and then issue for some activism. Why don't they are not allowed to go to the temple? Things like that. That's not true. That's all wrong thinking. Yeah. So people follow it, especially for serious things. They will follow. Most people follow. When it comes to on simple things, they compromise here and there. But we don't sit and judge people. Uh, we don't judge. It's not proper to judge people's relationship with God. But unfortunately, you see that in so many religious traditions, where we don't like to judge others people's relationships with each other. You know, we don't consider that's a good thing to do. But we sit and consider and analyze and criticize and condemn how other people are relating to gods. Why is that? Perhaps because we ourselves are insecure about our relationship with God. You know. So it's all just it's a mob thinking. And then sit and criticize everybody else. So that makes me feel better and superior and secure and you know so and enhance my relationship. Like sometimes we criticize other people so that then I think I'm better. My relationship is better because other people's relationships are messed up. And the same thing applies to God also. You know, this instead of working on understanding what I have to do, for myself. So anyway, so that's another topic. But anyway, it's important to know, this concept of religious purity and religious impurity. It's nothing to do with gender. There's nothing to do with physical, you know, sanitation, etc. Yes, even though this is how people try to present it. So anyway, so that's for that. So another question. Okay, this is another important question. Simple, but let's see. Where is this? Oh, wait. Okay, Arjuna asked. Oh, what happened? Oh, please, yeah, muting. Arjuna asked, and so Sri Krishna imparted this knowledge to him. Talking about Bhagavad Gita. It is said that you have to ask your teacher for this knowledge. How do I do this? Should I just ask you, Dhiraji, for this knowledge? Should I just ask you, Dhiraji, for this knowledge? Where do I go from here? This is an example of the question, not just me, anybody. Where do I go from here? Okay. So, yeah, this asking, they always say that. So this knowledge is given when asked in our tradition. Okay. That's why we don't have the concept of proselytization. Okay. Our religion doesn't expect of us to go and propagate it. Truth doesn't require propagation. Truth is truth. Either one sees it or one doesn't see it. And there is a way by which you get to see it. See it in the sense, understand it. This is not something to propagate or something to popularize. It's not a product. Even though that's why, when you get into that kind of thinking, then it becomes a sales product. Because that is how you sell things. Because now it's all has to do with the number. The more the people, the more outreach. So the more you outreach, the more people are there, the more number is there, the more better you feel, and so you gives you more strength and whatnot. There's nothing to do with is it true or is it not true. A truth will stand on its own legs. Of course, only in minds that are seeking the truth. That's all. So here, so there is an important element to this always. Then why does it say only when you ask, you give? That is for both. That is for both. For the one who teaches this knowledge. So let's say there's a student, because our religious tradition also is a tradition of teaching. It's a teaching tradition. So there is knowledge involved. And so there is a teacher and a taught. Someone who knows is a teacher. Someone who's getting to know is the taught. So this particular thing is there. This applies to both. So the teacher is also cautioned that this is your job is not to sit down and propagate or popularize anything. Your job, your responsibility is to share what you know, what you understand. So if somebody wants to know, and how do you share what you know? Not by standing on the street corner and yelling at everybody. You talk to people who want to talk to you. You share your knowledge with somebody who wants to know. That is the most meaningful way to communicate. So that the other person is more likely to listen intelligently. So here that applies to the one who teaches, and also it applies to the student. How does it apply to the student now? The student doesn't know. Obviously, if the student knows, then they're not going to, they don't need to learn. If they already know. If they don't know, then how do they know what to ask? How do they know what to ask? So they say, that's why, in business, they say an educated consumer is the best customer. You know, they say like that. So if you are educated, if you want to go buy something, you have to do, if you do a little research and you know what the things are, then you're the best customer because you know exactly what you want, you know what its value is, and then the whole transaction becomes much more intelligent and sensible and easier. If you don't know, if you're ignorant of the product that you're seeking, then how are you going to know and pick up what is good, what is not good? Was it priced right? Is it not priced right? You know, same price, same thing manufactured, same clothing manufactured in a third world country comes here, comes to the US. I know because I know some people in the garment industry. So the same product goes to the top stores first, and it is high priced, very high priced. Then it doesn't sell there for so many 2 weeks or whatever. There's a time limit. It doesn't sell. Then what do they do with that? They don't just throw it. Then they will go to the next level stores. And the same thing is priced lower. There also it doesn't sell. Then the same thing is sold in the still, cheaper store. And then there also it doesn't sell. Then it will go to some kind of a outlet kind of a thing. It's the same stuff. Okay. So how are you going? Where do you? It all depends on you pay depending on where you go to buy. That's all. So like that, many of the clothes are sold like that. Not all. There are some differences in quality, but this is a very general sales tactic. So you will only go. So here also, I don't know what I'm seeking, and so now I want to, know something about Bhagavan, about God, prayer, things like that. So what am I going to do? I'll go listen to all different kinds of sales pitch. And there are enough people selling religion out there too, trying to propagate it for their own different purposes and promising all kinds of things, in this life, in the next life. The best product to sell is things which you don't have to give right away. Correct? So only promise, you sell promises because all that I'm going to get after I die. So that is the whole deal. If I'm going to get everything after I die, then you don't need FedEx, you don't need UPA, you don't need any of that stuff. It's all going to come to you. But I have to pay for it now. So there are like that, a lot of salesmen are there. And so this goes on, So here, really speaking, if I don't know anything, I don't know what to ask. If I know the stuff, I don't need to ask anybody. So what is meant by that, So here the idea really is to to have a certain sincerity in the seeking, So a certain attitude is important in order to gain this particular knowledge, because we don't have this knowledge is not just propagated or popularized like that. We have it pervading in the culture that is different from propagating. Our religious traditions are pervasive in our culture, but pervasiveness is not the same as propagation. There's no propagation. It is just that people practice. So here, but the seeking to know has to be sincere. Otherwise, one will not listen. So it is to indicate that sincerity. Once that sincerity, I don't know, and most of the times I don't know what I'm seeking. I don't know what I'm seeking. So I don't know the goal exactly. Who understands the goal? We understand it in our own way, depending on whatever ideas we have. I know that at least I know what I don't want. I don't want to be unhappy. I don't want to be mortal. All these are the things that bother me. My mind is not at peace. These are the things that I experience that I want to free myself of. And I'm looking for some kind of a solution. So we have some kind of a vague idea, some general idea when it comes to understanding. But there is a sentiment, a sincerity. Okay. So that much is enough. That's the starting point, really speaking. That's all that is the starting point. And so once the start, then in our tradition, we have teaching, thinking, asking, analyzing, understanding, and growing, in time. So then the process takes care of everything else. Once I start with the sincere desire to seek, because Bhagavan is not just some subject matter to know, you know, it is something very intimate for every being, every living being in our tradition. It's a relationship between the creator and the created. We're all created. In the sense we didn't come here. We don't know how we got here as individuals, living beings, We didn't create ourselves. We didn't create. This much we know. So something brought us here, whatever the cause may be, which we don't know, may not understand. But we assume a cause, you know, our mind assumes a cause.
And it is joyfully performed.
What is happening? Oh, I
And
think we
next,
have to. Can somebody mute?
what is this?
Mute.
Avajananti mam muda.
Can we, Vasanta? Can you mute it? Okay, thank you. So, this is what happens. We don't know what we are seeking, but at the same time, we have an urge to know. And then the teaching kind of guides us through the whole process. So that is all that is all there is to ask. I I think there's one more this question from before. The deities propitiated by yajna will give desirable objects. What are these desirable objects? I believe that when we pray, we surrender our issues to our deity or God to be solved or help us resolve, even if it were not what we desire. So now why ask for desirable objects? Is it not wrong, even with sacrifice? It also implies that one could, through sacrifice, ask for wrongful desires and be granted. Okay. So we pray for different things, and we call it obviously desirable. Otherwise, we won't be praying for it. Okay. So when I pray for something, I pray for something which I think is desirable to me. No. So here it may be desirable or not desirable for somebody else. I may suppose I wish ill for someone else. I want to win the lottery. Okay. So obviously I pray that I win the lottery. Nobody prays for somebody else to win the lottery. Okay. You pray for yourself to win the lottery. But then you also, there's an implied prayer there that the other fellow should not win. Other fellow, because you don't want to share it either. So suppose there are two people praying for the lottery. And then, so what God decides, okay, let me give it to both. Then would that be acceptable to you? So, no, no, no. I want him not to get, I want me to get, obviously. You know. So in a desire can be, is it positive for me, but need not be positive for everybody else. So now what is Bhagavan supposed to do? You know. So here there are different reasons why we pray, So one is in order for fulfilling a particular desire. So sometimes the prayers are specific, sometimes the prayers are general. Sometimes I want to be better person. Sometimes the prayer is for growth, one's own spiritual growth. I don't know what growth is. Sometimes prayers are only gratitude, expressing one's gratitude for what one has. One doesn't ask for anything more, or one is grateful for, even though I ask for more, I'm grateful for what I have. So then that is there. So prayers, so there are different kinds of prayers. So prayers get granted. We don't know what Bhagavan decides. The laws decide. Okay. Laws decide what is going to be fulfilled and what is not going to be fulfilled, and what the consequence is going to be. You know, the person wants money, 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 lottery, 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 gets the lottery. Did you know that more than half the people who get the lottery, end up losing that money very quickly by spending it foolishly, investing it foolishly, and giving it away foolishly, you know. And a very few people, a smaller percentage of it, so make something out of it, which long term, which benefits long term. There are so many stories in our Puranas of people who were great devotees and they pray, and their prayers are granted. Prayers, granting of prayers is a result of our karma, of our action. So, and all actions have consequences. So when we act for a particular end, that end may be accomplished as a result of our action, as a result of our prayer. But what its ultimate consequences is not something that the one who gives is responsible for, really speaking. Because I don't lose my free will once I get what I want. My free will is still there. So there's so many stories. Ravan, look at this case of Ravana. So Ravana was a great devotee of Lord Shiva. And then a lot of these asuras are like that. Then they ask for boons through their devotion, through their penance, through their all kinds of things, through the worship. They ask for boons, certain ends, and they get them. Because that is the result of their devotion and their worship. And then afterwards, what happens? They don't lose their free will, but the consequence, they don't have the maturity to handle what they get. And so it goes into their heads. Usually it has to do with ego for the most part. And now then they become Rakshasas, they start abusing their what they have gotten. So one can pray for things which are we think are good, because we don't have a clear idea of what to pray for. We look at our short term goals, and we get what we pray for. Sometimes we get, sometimes we don't, depending on our karmas, our actions. And then what we do with what we get is another action which has its own results. So that is the important thing here. But we pray for different reasons, you know. Some are constructive, some are not constructive. When usually when it is to harm another person, suppose I pray for somebody else to be harmed or hurt. Now what am I doing? There are two questions come up here, you know. So one is that I want to hurt another is also a kind of an action which has its own consequence, you know. Adharma. I want to do something which is adharma, that goes against righteousness, against universal values, you know. That is going to have its consequence, negative consequence. Even if that particular prayer, the action itself may give me that particular result that I am seeking. That is one thing, you know. The other side to this question is, if somebody is praying for me negative, then what happens? So now should I go about being afraid of everybody? You know, because so many people wish ill for me. You know, so many people wish ill for me for different reasons. So now what am I? I'm a paranoid guy. But no. So one has, if one lives a life of dharma, really, you are protected too. You protect yourself. That's why one's own, that is where one's own mind and one's own faith and one's own spirituality becomes a protection. Like even from a psychological standpoint, you know, if I'm a stronger person emotionally, I protect myself from others who seek to cause disturbance in me. If I am a weak person, even emotionally, then I become more vulnerable to other people's, you know, negativities. So that even simple, we see that. You see, physically, it's true too. If I'm physically weak, then anybody can push me around. If I'm emotionally weak, then anybody can push me around emotionally. If I'm spiritually weak, then I become vulnerable to others. Again, others, whatever, on a spiritual level, on a religious level, on a mental level, on a psychological level, on a physical level. It's all true in all of these. So one's own sincerity, one's own strength is a protection. That's why we have all these kavachams. We call it kavacham, you know. Kavacham is an armor. And so we even, our prayers also, there are certain kinds of prayers that help us gain this inner strength to be able to deal and cope with others' negativities in whichever form it comes. Even if the other person sits and prays to God to hurt me, you know, then my own prayers will protect me too, you know. So, like that. That's how it goes. Okay, so we'll stop with this for today and then continue with more next time. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.